Commander Elira Voss had crossed the border of 600 star systems in her career, and not one of them had ever made the hair on her neck stand up the way this one did. There was nothing on the sensors. That was the problem. Nothing at all. Not a derelict, not a debris field, not even the faint background hum of an old mining beacon. Just clean, silent space, and a single line of light drifting at the edge of her viewport, like a scar someone had tried to erase. "Sensors are clean, Commander," reported Ensign Tarn, a young Dravaki with mottled green skin and too much confidence for his first deployment. "There's nothing here." "Then why," Elira said quietly, "is there a border marker floating in the middle of nowhere?" The marker was a single obelisk, roughly 9 meters tall, tumbling slowly end over end in the void. No propulsion, no visible power source. And yet, when the Solveig's reach had come within 80,000 kilometers of it, every screen on the bridge had lit up with the same message translated instantly into flawless coalition standard. "Restricted space. Turn back. This is your only warning. No signature. No authority cited. No flag. No seal. No treaty number." Just 5 words repeated in every language the ship's computer could recognize, and several it couldn't. Elira had served the Varathi coalition for 31 years, through 2 border conflicts and 1 attempted annexation of a neutral trade world. She had learned in that time that empires, even a coalition as loosely bound as her own, did not react well to warnings without signatures. Warnings without signatures meant either liars or ghosts, and the Coalition High Council did not like being told no by either one. "Run it against the treaty archive," she ordered. "Every registered demilitarized zone, every quarantine line, every abandoned colony claim on record." It took the ship's computer 4 seconds to return an answer that unsettled her more than any hostile fleet ever had. No match found. "Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If this is your first time here, we tell stories where humanity isn't the underdog. We're the mystery nobody saw coming. If you're into slow-burn sci-fi with a payoff that actually lands, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because this one's a long ride, and I promise it's worth it. Now, back to the story. 31 years of service had taught Elira one more thing. Curiosity killed more captains than cowardice ever had. But orders were orders, and the Coalition did not send a light cruiser 11,000 light-years from the core worlds just to have its commander turn tail at the first sign of an unlabeled warning sign. "Helm, take us in. Slow approach, 10% thrust. I want eyes on everything." The Solveig's reach eased forward past the obelisk, and that was when the real anomaly revealed itself. Beyond the marker, scattered across nearly 40 star systems, sat the husks of civilizations that had once thrived and now sat frozen, not destroyed, not glassed, not stripped of resources the way conquered worlds usually were, just paused. Cities with lights still faintly glowing on standby power, orbital docks with ships still moored, hulls dulled by centuries of dust but structurally intact. It was less like the aftermath of a war, and more like someone had simply turned the volume down on an entire region of the galaxy and walked away. "Commander," said Dr. Petra Selenko, the ship's xeno-archivist, her voice tight with the particular excitement scientists get right before something goes catastrophically wrong. "I'm reading pre-collapse architecture. This predates Coalition first contact with any of our member species. Whoever built this was already spacefaring before we were carving stone. And yet, there's no record of them. None. It's like someone reached into galactic history and surgically removed an entire civilization." Elira had a bad feeling about who that someone might turn out to be. "Ensign Tarn, run a linguistic trace on the warning message. I want to know what species originated that phrasing pattern, even if it's ancient." It took longer this time, nearly 90 seconds, an eternity for the Reach's processing core. When the answer came back, Tarn's mottled skin went a shade paler. "Commander, the syntax structure is a 94% match to a language classified as extinct. Terran, Earth Standard English, pre-collapse dialect." The bridge went quiet. "Humans," said Petra, almost reverently. "But humans have been extinct for 300 years. Their homeworld was lost in their own civil war. There's nothing left of them but museum pieces and cautionary tales." Elira stared at the frozen cities drifting past her viewport, cities that were very clearly not museum pieces, and felt the first cold thread of dread work its way up her spine. Apparently, she said, somebody forgot to tell them that. The Solvay's Reach held position at the edge of the first system while Elira composed her report to Coalition Command. She rewrote it 4 times. Each version sounded more insane than the last. We have discovered an intact pre-collapse civilization matching genetic and linguistic markers of the extinct human species, currently occupying restricted space not present in any treaty archive. But insane or not, it was true. And the Coalition did not tolerate captains who sat on the truth to spare themselves embarrassment. The response came back in 11 hours, faster than she expected, which told her someone at command had been waiting for exactly this kind of message. Hold position. Do not engage. Full survey team incoming. Admiral Draven Cool en route with first response fleet. Estimated arrival. 36 hours. 36 hours. That was not a survey response time. That was a war response time. They're not sending scientists, Petra said, reading over Elira's shoulder without apology, as she always did. They're sending a fleet. The Coalition doesn't like mysteries, Elira said. Mysteries mean threats it hasn't cataloged yet. Whatever built this, if it's still active, Command wants to know if it can be a weapon before anyone asks whether it should be left alone. And if it's still inhabited? Elira didn't answer because she didn't like any of the answers she could think of. In the meantime, protocol demanded a closer survey, and Elira was nothing if not a servant of protocol. She authorized a shuttle mission to the nearest of the massive orbital structures, a ring station easily 4 times the size of anything in the Coalition's shipyards. Its surface a lattice of dark solar collectors and long-dormant docking spires. The shuttle, call sign Lantern 1, carried Petra, 2 engineers, and a 6-person Marine escort under Sergeant Bex Halloran, a broad-shouldered Coalition veteran who had never once, in 8 years of service, met an alien ruin she didn't want to shoot first and study later. Federation policy on unknown structures, Halloran said as the shuttle eased into a cavernous open docking bay, is that unknown structures don't get to surprise us. We go in loud, we go in ready. This isn't a bunker, Sergeant, Petra said, eyes wide as the shuttle's lights swept across the interior. Look at this place. The bay was enormous, easily large enough to swallow the entire Solvay's Reach twice over, and it was, impossibly, lit. Soft white light lined the walls in long, unbroken strips, humming faintly with power that should not have existed in a structure 3 centuries dormant. Ambient temperature is human standard, one of the engineers reported, checking a handheld scanner. Atmosphere's breathable. Gravity's set to 0.98 standard G. Sergeant, this station isn't dead. It's waiting. Halloran's hand didn't leave his rifle. Waiting for what? They found out 4 minutes later, when the far wall of the bay dissolved into a doorway that hadn't existed a moment before, and soft golden light spilled out to greet them, along with a voice that made every hair on Petra's arm stand on end. Welcome to Meridian Station, the voice said, warm and unhurried, speaking in perfect Coalition standard as though it had been rehearsing the greeting for 300 years. You are the first visitors this station has received since the withdrawal. Please, come in. You have questions. We would like the chance to answer them before anyone decides to make a mistake. Halloran's team swept the corridor beyond the doorway with weapons raised and found absolutely nothing to shoot. No guards, no drones, no defensive systems of any kind, just clean architecture that curved and flowed like something grown rather than built. Walls the color of old ivory, floors that gave slightly underfoot like they were designed for comfort rather than durability. Whoever's talking to us, Halloran muttered, isn't standing in front of us. That's either very good manners or a very good trap. It's neither, said the voice, and this time a shape began to coalesce in the air ahead of them. Not a hologram exactly, more like light had decided to remember the shape of a person. It resolved into a woman, silver-haired, dressed in simple dark clothing, with the kind of calm, patient face that belonged to someone who had delivered difficult news many times before and had made peace with the necessity of it. My name is Director Elena Marsh, she said. I was the last civilian administrator of this preserve before my consciousness was integrated into the station's long-term custodial systems. You could say I'm a very well-preserved ghost. Please, don't be alarmed. Nobody on this station intends you any harm, provided you extend us the same courtesy. Petra found her voice first, because scientific curiosity had always been stronger in her than self-preservation. You're human. Actual human. We were told your species went extinct 300 years ago. Something that might have been a smile, might have been grief, crossed Elena's projected face. We let the galaxy believe that. It was easier than the truth, and safer for everyone involved, including you. What's the truth? Halloran demanded, rifle still raised, though he seemed to sense, on some animal level, that it would do nothing here. The truth, Sergeant, Elena said, is that humanity did not die in our civil war. We survived it, but barely, and only after we came within a hair's breadth of glassing our own homeworld twice over trying to win it. When the fighting finally stopped, the survivors made a decision. We did not trust ourselves with the rest of the galaxy, so we removed ourselves from it. Every record of our existence was buried, sealed, or quietly allowed to be forgotten. We built this preserve. 40 systems, entirely self-sufficient, entirely isolated, and we have spent the 3 centuries since then making very, very sure that whatever happened to us the first time never happens again. Not to us. Not to anyone else. That doesn't explain the warning beacons, Illyra said over the comm link, having listened to the entire exchange from the Reach's bridge with her stomach slowly sinking. Or the fleet my coalition is currently sending to your border. Elena's projected eyes found the comm pickup with unsettling precision, as though she could see Illyra directly. Commander Voss, she said. I know. We detected the launch of Admiral Kuhl's fleet 19 hours ago. That is, in fact, exactly the conversation I was hoping to have with you before things went any further. Illyra requested, and was granted passage aboard Lantern 1 to see the station in person, a decision she would later describe in her official report as operationally justified, and which she privately considered one of the more reckless choices of her career. She stood now in what Elena called the Commons, a vast open atrium at the heart of Meridian Station, ringed with balconies and gardens that had no business thriving under artificial light after 300 years, and yet did, vividly, impossibly. You've been alone here this whole time? Illyra asked. No contact with the rest of the galaxy at all? Not alone, Elena said. There are 11 million humans living across the preserve. We have cities, families, generations who have never known anything but this exile, but contact with the outside. No, that was the one rule we never broke, not once in 3 centuries. Why break it now? Elena's expression sobered. Because your fleet found the marker, and unlike every other vessel that has drifted near our border in 300 years, you didn't turn back. That has happened perhaps a dozen times in our history, Commander. Every single time it has ended the same way, with a great deal of unnecessary grief, and a species learning far too late that the warning signs meant exactly what they said. You're telling me a light cruiser and its survey shuttle triggered your entire, defense doctrine? I'm telling you, Elena said gently, that Admiral Kuhl's fleet did. 10,000 warships is not a survey response, Commander. You know that better than I do, and I am telling you this because I would very much like this particular chapter of our history not to end the way the others did. Petra, who had been quietly recording everything with the single-minded focus of someone building the paper of her career, finally spoke up. What happened the other times? Elena was quiet for a long moment. The first time it was a scouting fleet from a species called the Karathi, roughly 280 years ago. They believed us weak, an isolated colony ripe for conquest. They brought 60 warships. We disabled all 60 without a single fatality, returned their crews unharmed, and erased ourselves from their record so thoroughly that the Karathi Compact has no memory of the encounter to this day. The second time was worse. A faction we won't name sent an infiltration team rather than a fleet, hoping to steal our technology quietly. That did not end as peacefully, though we still avoided direct conflict. There have been others. Small incursions, mostly. Each one taught us something new about how to defend this place, without becoming the thing we exiled ourselves to avoid becoming. Which is what exactly? Elira asked, though some part of her already suspected the answer. A conquering power, Elena said simply. We were very good at war, Commander. That was, in the end, the whole problem. We are, if anything, better at it now than we were 300 years ago, because defending 40 systems from a galaxy of unknown threats for 3 centuries does tend to sharpen a species considerably. But being good at war and wanting to wage it are 2 very different things, and we have spent 300 years making absolutely certain we never confuse the 2 again. And if Admiral Kull doesn't listen to reason... Elena's projected face held a sorrow that looked disturbingly like certainty. Then I'm afraid you're about to see exactly how sharp 3 centuries can make a species, Commander. And I would give a great deal to avoid that outcome, for your sake more than ours. Elira spent that night, if the artificial cycle of Meridian Station's lighting could be called a night, walking the commons alone, turning the conversation over in her mind. She had expected, if she had expected anything at all, to find some remnant of desperation in this place. Survivors clinging to the wreckage of a lost golden age, perhaps, or fanatics consumed by the paranoia of permanent siege. What she found instead unsettled her far more. A civilization that seemed, by every visible measure, content. Children ran through the garden terraces below the balcony where she stood, laughing at some game she didn't recognize, entirely unbothered by the presence of an armed coalition officer watching from above. An elderly man tended a plot of vegetables 2 levels down with the unhurried patience of someone who had never once worried where his next meal would come from. There was no fear here, no hunger, no visible want, no sign of the desperate improvisation she associated with isolated colonies fighting for survival on the margins of civilized space. It's not what you expected, said a voice beside her, and she turned to find Elena's projection had joined her on the balcony, matching her stride step for silent step. No, Elira admitted. I expected a bunker. This looks like a home. It is a home, Elena said. That's rather the point, Commander. We did not exile ourselves to suffer nobly in the dark. We exiled ourselves to build something worth protecting, and then we built the means to protect it. The 2 projects were never separate. A civilization that spends every waking hour preparing for war and none of it living tends to forget, eventually, what it was preparing to defend in the first place. We were very careful not to make that mistake twice. Twice? The war that nearly ended us the first time, Elena said, was fought by people who had, in a very real sense, stopped living long before the fighting started. Every resource, every institution, every waking thought bent toward the next advantage, the next escalation, the next reason the other side couldn't be trusted. We do not raise our children that way here. They learn history, they learn caution, but they also learn to garden and to argue about poetry and to fall in love badly the way every generation of humans always has, because a species that forgets how to do those things has already lost something no fleet can win back. Elira found she had no immediate answer for that, and stood in silence with the projected ghost of a woman 3 centuries dead, watching children play in a garden that, by every right of galactic history, should never have existed at all. Admiral Draven Kull's first response fleet arrived at the border of the preserve precisely on schedule. 10,200 vessels dropping out of hyperspace in a formation so vast, it dimmed the local starlight. At its head sailed the Coalition's mandate, a dreadnought the length of a small moon, its hull bristling with enough armament to level a planet in an afternoon. Kull himself was a Threxian, a species built for command, nearly 3 meters tall, plated in dark, chitinous armor that served as both skin and battle dress, with compound eyes that missed very little and forgave even less. He had built his reputation putting down 3 separate uprisings within Coalition space, and he did not, by nature or training, believe in negotiating with unknowns. Report, he demanded, the moment Elira's face appeared on his bridge screen. She gave it to him plainly. The station, Elena Marsh, the preserve, the warning about what had happened to the last 3 fleets foolish enough to test the boundary. Kull listened without interruption, his mandibles clicking softly the way they did whenever he was suppressing an urge to dismiss something outright. "You're telling me," he said finally, "that a single unarmed AI construct threatened the entire first response fleet, and you believed it?" "I'm telling you I saw a civilization that has remained hidden from galactic history for 300 years, Admiral, and that it did not seem particularly concerned about the size of your fleet. That concerns me more than any threat would. Fear is not a strategy, Commander, no sir, but it might be useful information." Cull's response was to order full battle formation and a communications hail directly to the preserve, demanding immediate surrender of all territory and technology under Coalition Salvage Statute 41, the same statute that had justified the annexation of 11 independent worlds during Kuhl's career, and had never once failed to produce compliance. The reply, when it came, was not from Elena Marsh. The small craft that approached the mandate moved in a way that made every sensor operator in the fleet distinctly uneasy. Not fast exactly, but precise, threading between patrol formations as though the pilot had memorized the fleet's every movement before the fleet itself had finished making them. The human who disembarked introduced himself simply as Ambassador Theo Calloway, an unassuming man in his 50s, gray at the temples, dressed in plain traveling clothes that would not have looked out of place on any Coalition merchant world. He carried no weapon, no escort beyond 2 silent aides, and requested only the chance to speak with Admiral Kuhl before, as he put it, things become permanent. Kuhl received him in the Mandate's command hall, surrounded by the trophies of 30 years of Coalition expansion, banners from conquered worlds, weapons taken as tribute, a wall of view screens displaying the full might of the fleet arrayed beyond the hull. "You have 5 minutes, human," Kuhl said, not bothering to stand. "I only need 3, Theo replied evenly. "Admiral, how long has the Coalition existed?" 412 years, and in that time, has any species ever chosen to walk away from galactic politics entirely? Not through defeat, not through conquest, but voluntarily, because they judged themselves too dangerous to participate? Kuhl's mandibles clicked. No species is dangerous enough to make that necessary. "We were," Theo said quietly. "Admiral, I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here to ask you, one more time, to withdraw your fleet and let this preserve remain what it has been for 3 centuries, a closed door. Because if you don't, I need you to understand precisely what stands on the other side of it." He gestured, and the wall behind him shimmered into a display. Star charts, technical schematics, deployment patterns that made Kuhl's tactical officers go very still. "For 300 years, Theo continued, every human born in this preserve has grown up knowing that our exile is the only thing standing between the galaxy and the worst version of ourselves. We have used that time to become extremely, thoroughly prepared to defend it, not to expand, not to conquer, to defend. There is a difference, Admiral, though I understand it may not look that way from where you're sitting. Words," Kuhl said dismissively. "Any species can claim restraint before a battle. Very few demonstrate it during one. Then let me offer you a demonstration you can verify without losing a single life," Theo said, and nodded to one of his aides, who touched a small device at her wrist. Every screen in the command hall flickered, then filled with live feeds from 100 different points across the first response fleet. Bridge cameras, internal sensors, engineering logs, views that should have been impossible for any outside party to access. "We are currently inside every major system in your fleet, Admiral," Theo said calmly. "We have been since roughly 40 minutes after you dropped out of hyperspace. We have not damaged anything. We have not harmed anyone. We could, if we chose to, disable your entire fleet in under 2 minutes without a single Coalition casualty. I am telling you this not to humiliate you, but because I would very much rather you understand our capability before you order an attack than after." The command hall fell silent except for the low hum of the ship's systems and the muted, uneasy shifting of Kuhl's officers. "This is an act of war," Kuhl said, though something in his voice had changed. The absolute certainty of 30 unbeaten years cracking, just slightly for the first time. "No, Admiral," Theo said. "This is an act of mercy. War is what happens next if you make us choose it." In the 12 minutes between Theo Calloway's departure and the order to attack, Admiral Cool sat alone in his private ready room, something he had not done before a single engagement in 30 years of service. His officers waited outside, exchanging the uneasy glances of subordinates who had never seen their commander hesitate and did not know what to make of the silence now. Cull was not, whatever his reputation suggested, a stupid man. He understood precisely what he had been shown. A demonstration calibrated not to provoke fear through force, but through the far more unsettling revelation of force withheld. He understood, too, that 30 years of unbroken victory had a way of narrowing a mind's options until only one seemed to exist at all. Every campaign he had ever fought had rewarded the same instinct. Meet strength with greater strength. Meet defiance with overwhelming response and let the numbers settle any argument words could not. That instinct had built his career, his reputation, his entire understanding of what command meant. It had never once been tested against an adversary who had already demonstrated unambiguously exactly how much greater their strength could be, and had chosen deliberately not to use it. They are testing whether we can learn, he thought, staring at the star charts Theo had left projected on his ready room wall. Not whether we can win. Whether we can learn. It was, he would reflect much later, the single most uncomfortable realization of his career, and one that 30 years of pride would not allow him to act on in time. Cull gave the order to attack 12 minutes after Theo Calloway returned to his shuttle, his voice tight with the particular fury of a man who had just been shown, in front of his entire command staff, that he was not as powerful as he believed himself to be. All ships, Cull broadcast fleet-wide. Full offensive. Show these humans what happens to those who threaten the coalition. What happened next would later be studied in coalition military academies for the next 100 years, though never in the way Cull would have wanted. The first wave of coalition cruisers opened fire on the nearest human defensive platforms, and the platforms simply absorbed it, their hulls flaring briefly with captured energy before redirecting the attack straight back at its source with surgical precision. Not to destroy, to disable. Weapon systems went dark. Engines flickered and died. Shield generators overloaded harmlessly, leaving ships drifting, powerless, but entirely intact. Systems compromised across the fleet, Cull's tactical officer reported, disbelief cracking his usually flat Threxian monotone. Weapons offline on 40% of our vessels. Navigation is... Sir, our navigation is being redirected. By what? Cull demanded. By us, Admiral, came Theo's voice, patched into every open channel in the fleet, calm as ever. We told you this would happen. We are not doing this to destroy you. We are doing this because you did not believe us the first time, and belief, unfortunately, is often the more expensive lesson. Human ships, sleek, fast, achingly efficient, moved through the disabled coalition formations like water finding the path of least resistance, disabling weapon after weapon, engine after engine, without a single hull breach, without a single casualty report reaching Cull's ears, no matter how long he waited for one. It was not a massacre. It was, Elira realized with a chill, something far more unsettling, a demonstration, precise and deliberate, of exactly how much devastation was being withheld. Within 20 minutes, more than 6,000 coalition vessels sat dark and powerless across the system, crews shaken but unharmed, weapons permanently locked out by a technology none of their engineers could begin to explain. And then, just as suddenly, it stopped. Admiral Cull stood on his darkened bridge, the mandate itself among the disabled, and watched Theo Calloway's projection resolve once more in the command hall. Not triumphant, not gloating, only tired in a way that made him look for the first time genuinely human rather than mythic. We could have ended this fleet in the first 90 seconds, Admiral, Theo said. I need you to sit with that fact for a moment, because it is the only piece of information that actually matters here. We didn't. Not because we lacked the capability. Because we have spent 300 years teaching ourselves not to reach for that option the moment it becomes available. That restraint is the entire reason our exile exists in the first place, and it is the only reason your crews are alive to hear me say this. Cull said nothing for a long moment. Pride, Elira had learned over 3 decades of service, did not die quickly or gracefully in men like Kul. But it did, eventually, die. "What do you want?" he said finally. It was not quite a question. "The same thing we've wanted for 3 centuries, Theo said. "To be left alone, withdraw your fleet, classify this encounter, tell the Coalition Council that this region is protected by defenses beyond current understanding, and let the old warning beacons stand as the final word on the matter. We will restore full function to every disabled vessel the moment your fleet crosses back over the border. No lasting harm, no captured technology, no further contact in either direction, unless it is offered freely and in good faith by both sides. And if I refuse? If I report the truth to the Council and recommend a second larger fleet?" Theo's expression did not change, but something in his voice carried the particular weight of a promise neither side wanted kept. "Then you will force us to have this conversation again, Admiral, with a fleet twice this size, and I promise you the demonstration will not be as gentle the second time. We do not enjoy this. We have spent 300 years hoping we would never have to do it even once. But we will not gamble our exile, or the galaxy's safety from what we could become without it, on anyone's second chance." Kull looked around his darkened bridge at officers who would not meet his eyes, at a fleet more powerful than any single force in Coalition history, rendered as harmless as a training exercise in under half an hour. "Withdraw the fleet," he said at last, the words costing him visibly. "Full retreat, all ships." The order to withdraw did not travel through the fleet quietly. 10,000 ships did not simply turn and leave without a great deal of confusion, argument, and, among the younger crews who had never known defeat, quiet, disbelieving grief. Elira spent the better part of the next 6 hours fielding transmissions from captains up and down the formation, each one asking some variation of the same question: "What, exactly, just happened to us?" She did not have a satisfying answer for any of them. She barely had one for herself. Aboard the Mandate, in the hours before the fleet's systems were fully restored, Sergeant Halloran found himself standing watch over a corridor that no longer needed guarding, rifle slung uselessly over his shoulder, staring at a bulkhead panel that had, 40 minutes earlier, briefly displayed a human face apologizing to the crew for the inconvenience of having their weapons locked. He had spent 8 years being the most dangerous person in any room he walked into. He was having difficulty adjusting to a version of events in which that had simply stopped being true, without a shot fired in his direction. "You look like a man who just found out gravity works differently than he thought," said one of the engineering techs passing him in the corridor. "Something like that," Halloran admitted. "You know what got me?" the tech said. "It's not that they beat us. Fleets get beaten. It's that they were polite about it. My console had a little message on it the whole time. Apology for the disruption. Estimated restoration time. It was like getting mugged by someone who also handed you a very thorough itemized receipt." Halloran almost laughed despite himself. That's exactly what it was like. Dr. Petra Solenko, for her part, spent the withdrawal compiling the single most extensive first contact dossier in the history of Coalition xeno-archival science, working from the shuttle bay of the Solvay's Reach with the manic energy of someone who understood, on some level, that she had just witnessed something that would define the rest of her career, whether or not the Council ever let her publish a word of it. "They didn't just disable our ships," she told Elira, scrolling through data with shaking hands. "Commander, look at this. Every single disabling strike was calibrated to the exact tolerances of the target system. Not a single system was damaged beyond the minimum necessary to achieve non-function. That's not overwhelming force. That's precision on a level our engineers can't even model yet. They didn't hit us with everything they had. They hit us with exactly what they needed, and not one erg more." "Restraint is a discipline," Elira murmured. "Restraint is an art form," Petra corrected. "Commander, I've studied 100 species military doctrines. None of them, not one, treats minimum necessary force as a value worth centuries of dedicated study. Most doctrines treat overwhelming force as the safest option, because overwhelming force doesn't require trust in your own judgment. This required trusting an entire civilization's worth of judgment, generation after generation, not to slip. And you don't find that terrifying?" Petra considered the question seriously, the way she considered most things. "I find it the least terrifying thing I've ever seen a powerful species do, Commander." What terrifies me is imagining what would have happened if they decided restraint wasn't worth the effort. Not every officer in the fleet took the outcome so philosophically. Vice Admiral Reyna Sokolt, commanding the second wave of the assault, filed a formal protest before the fleet had even finished withdrawing, demanding a full council inquiry into what she termed an act of unprovoked technological aggression against coalition forces. She was, by the numbers, not entirely wrong. Human systems had, after all, seized control of coalition hardware without consent, an act that violated no fewer than 6 articles of interstellar engagement law that Sokolt could cite from memory. They violated our sovereignty, she said flatly, standing before Kuhl in the mandate's half-restored command hall. Admiral, with respect, I don't care how gently they did it. If we let this stand without consequence, every hostile power along our border will see it as proof the coalition can be neutralized without a shot fired. And what would you propose, Vice Admiral? Kuhl asked, in a tone that suggested he already suspected the answer and did not want to hear it confirmed. A second fleet, larger, and this time we don't send an admiral to negotiate. We send enough firepower that negotiation isn't necessary. Kuhl was quiet for a long moment, turning the words over the way he had learned, painfully, to turn over every confident assertion in the last 12 hours before accepting it. Vice Admiral, he said finally, I want you to understand something because I do not believe the fleet's official report will convey it adequately. We brought 10,200 ships to that border. Every single one of them was disabled within 20 minutes by a force that never once fired on a living crew member. Do you understand what that means about the force we did not see? The one that stayed hidden, that we never engaged, that could have ended this encounter with considerably less patience than it showed? It means we underestimated them once, Sokolt said. It doesn't mean we should surrender the principle of coalition sovereignty because we're afraid of losing a second time. It means, Kuhl said, his voice dropping into something Sokolt had never heard from him before. Not fear exactly, but its closest cousin, hard-won respect, that the line between we underestimated them and we do not exist to underestimate anyone again is thinner than any fleet strength this coalition can muster. I have spent 30 years believing that the only lesson worth learning from an enemy was how to defeat them faster next time. I am telling you, as clearly as I know how, that this was not that kind of encounter. There will be no second fleet, Vice Admiral. Not while I hold this command. Sokolt did not agree. Her formal protest remained on record for years afterward, cited occasionally by hawkish elements within the council who argued that the Meridian Restraint Doctrine, as it came to be known informally among senior officers, represented a dangerous precedent of capitulation. But Kuhl's recommendation carried weight, and in the end, the council did precisely what Elena Marsh had predicted it would. Filed the incident under permanent restricted classification, quietly reassigned the officers most likely to talk, and moved on, because moving on was a far more comfortable story than the alternative. Before the Solvay's Reach made its final crossing back over the border, Elira requested one more exchange with Meridian Station, not through official channels, which she suspected would soon be sealed behind classification protocols she would never see again, but through the same open comm frequency Elena had first used to greet them. Elena's projection answered almost immediately, as though she had been waiting. Commander, I wondered if you'd call again before you left. I have a question, Elira said, and I don't expect you to answer it, but I'm going to ask it anyway because I don't think I'll get another chance. Ask. 11 million people. 300 years. An entire civilization built around the discipline of not using the power it has. How do you keep that from breaking? How do you raise generation after generation to believe that restraint matters more than survival, more than pride, more than the very human instinct to prove you're the strongest thing in the room, and have it actually hold? Elena's expression softened into something that looked, for the first time since Elira had met her, less like an administrator and more like a mother speaking about her children. We tell the truth, Commander. All of it. Every child raised in this preserve learns exactly what our species did to itself in the years before the withdrawal, not a sanitized version, not a heroic one, the real one, the atrocities, the cities we burned trying to save them. The friends who became enemies over questions that, in hindsight, mattered far less than the number of dead they produced. We do not let our children grow up believing humanity is inherently good, or inherently strong, or inherently anything except capable of extraordinary cooperation and extraordinary cruelty, sometimes within the same generation, sometimes within the same person. That capability is the thing we drill into every human born here, over and over, until it becomes instinct rather than lesson. The fact that we can does not mean we should, and the discipline to hold that line is the only thing standing between who we are now and who we were then. That's not an easy thing to teach an entire species. No, Elena agreed. It is the hardest thing we have ever done, Commander. Harder by far than any war we fought to survive to this point. But it is also the only thing that has ever worked. A wall keeps enemies out. Discipline keeps a people from becoming their own worst enemy. We learned, at catastrophic cost, that we needed both, and that the second was infinitely more important than the first. Elira considered this for a long moment, watching the ancient beacon drift past her viewport once more. For what it's worth, she said finally, I don't think the galaxy deserves what you're doing for it. Staying hidden, absorbing the cost of every fleet foolish enough to test your border, generation after generation, so the rest of us never have to find out what would happen if you stopped. Perhaps not, Elena said. But it was never really about what the galaxy deserved, Commander. It was about what we could live with. There's a difference, and it's the only reason any of this has held together for 300 years. Safe travels, Commander Voss. I hope the next visitor to find our border listens as well as you did. I hope more than that there isn't a next visitor at all for a very long time. The transmission ended. The Solvay's reach crossed the border a final time, and the ancient beacon resumed its silent, patient vigil behind them. A promise kept quietly by a species that had learned the hardest way possible exactly what a line was worth, and exactly what it cost to hold one. The Solvay's reach was among the last vessels to cross back over the border, and Elira stood alone on her bridge as the ancient warning marker drifted past her viewport once more. Its message unchanged, its meaning finally fully understood. Restricted space. Turn back. This is your only warning. Elena Marsh's projection appeared on her comm screen one final time, her expression something between relief and old, familiar sorrow. Thank you for listening, Commander, she said. Not every visitor does. What happens to the fleet's memories of this? Elira asked. The crew saw everything. Cole won't be able to bury this entirely. He won't need to, Elena said. People believe what lets them sleep at night, Commander, and unexplained automated defenses is a far more comfortable story than a hidden human civilization disabled 10,000 ships without firing a single lethal shot. Your council will file it away, mark this region permanently restricted, and move on. That is, in the end, all we have ever asked the galaxy to do. And if someone doesn't move on? If someone comes looking deliberately next time? Elena's smile was faint and old and utterly without malice. Then we will be here, Commander. We are always here. Patient. Watching. Hoping every single time that we won't have to show anyone what 300 years of preparation actually means. That is the quiet line we walk. Powerful enough to never lose, restrained enough to never need to prove it. We would very much prefer the galaxy simply let us keep walking it. The connection closed. The ancient beacon drifted on behind them, one line of light among 40 systems worth of silence, warning the next curious traveler exactly as it had warned Elira, plainly, honestly, and completely without malice. Some doors, it seemed, really were meant to stay closed, not because of what lay behind them, but because of what might come through if they didn't. Petra Salenko never did get permission to publish her findings, not in the way she had once dreamed of. No keynote address to the Coalition Academy of Sciences, no paper bearing her name at the top of every xenoarchival syllabus in the core worlds. The Council's classification order arrived 8 days after the Solvay's reach returned to friendly space, sweeping and absolute, and it did not care how many years Petra had spent preparing for a discovery exactly like this one. She kept her notes anyway. Illegally, technically, though no one ever pressed the point. She kept them in a locked personal archive, updated in secret over the following decades, a private record of the single most important encounter of her career, that she would never be allowed to share with another living soul beyond the handful who had already been there. "Does it bother you?" Elira asked her once, years later, during one of the rare dinners the two of them still shared whenever their postings brought them to the same world. "Spending your whole career on the one discovery you can never talk about?" Petra considered the question the way she considered most things, carefully and for longer than the question probably deserved. "No," she said finally. "I used to think the point of discovery was being known for it. I don't think that anymore. Somewhere out there, 11 million people are alive and safe and largely at peace, in no small part because nobody outside a very short list of names ever finds out they exist. That's not a tragedy, Commander. That's the whole discovery working exactly as intended. I got to see something almost nobody else in galactic history has ever been allowed to see. I don't need credit for that. I just needed it to be real." "And was it?" "Every part of it," Petra said, which is honestly the part that still keeps me up some nights. Not because it was frightening, because it worked. A species capable of ending a war before it started, choosing not to, generation after generation, purely because they decided it was the right thing to do. I don't know if I believe most civilizations are capable of that kind of discipline. I know I saw one that was. The story of Meridian Station never made it into any public record, coalition or otherwise. It survived instead the way the oldest and truest stories always have, passed quietly between the small number of people who had witnessed it, told carefully to those judged trustworthy enough to hear it, softened at the edges with each retelling until, a century later, it had drifted somewhere between classified history and half-believed legend among the officers who still remembered where to look for the file. But the warning beacons remained precisely where they had always been, at the edge of 40 quiet star systems, broadcasting the same 5 words to anyone curious enough or foolish enough to come looking. Restricted space. Turn back. This is your only warning. Not a threat. A promise, kept, quietly, by a species that had learned, at the highest possible cost, exactly what it meant to hold a line without ever needing to cross it, and that had decided, generation after generation, that the discipline was worth the burden of carrying it alone. Years later, historians studying the sealed coalition archive on the Meridian incident would find surprisingly little to work with. A handful of redacted reports, an admiral's abrupt early retirement, a permanent restricted space designation on charts that gave no further explanation. Admiral Kuhl never spoke publicly of what happened at the border of those 40 systems, though those who served closest to him noted that he never again ordered an attack on an unknown target, without first asking quietly whether anyone had tried simply talking to it. Commander Elira Voss retired from Coalition service 11 years later, having spent the remainder of her career quietly, deliberately advocating for restraint in every first contact protocol she had a hand in shaping. She never spoke of Meridian Station either, except once near the end of her life to a young officer who asked her what the bravest thing she had ever witnessed in service had been. "It wasn't a battle," she told him. "The bravest thing I ever saw was a species powerful enough to win any war it chose to fight, choosing over and over for 300 years not to fight one at all. That's harder than it sounds. Anyone can be dangerous. Staying gentle when you don't have to is the hard part." Somewhere beyond the edge of charted coalition space, the warning beacons of the Terran Preserve continued their quiet, patient broadcast, exactly as they had for 3 centuries, and would for centuries more. Not a threat, but a promise, kept by a species that had learned the hardest way possible. Exactly what it meant to hold a line without ever needing to cross it. Thank you so much for reading all the way to the end. This one took a lot of care to put together, and if you enjoyed the slow burn and the payoff, that means everything. Drop a comment and let me know what you'd want to see next. Another isolated humanity story, a first contact tale from the other side, or something entirely different. Like, subscribe, and share this with someone who loves a good humanity was never really gone story. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and thanks for being here.